Welcome back, friends. Dan Vega here, and today we're talking about externalized configuration in your Spring Boot applications. So here we are in the reference docs. I'll go ahead and leave this link in the description below, but I want to jump right in and talk about this. So Spring Boot lets you externalize your configuration so that you can work with the same application code in different environments. And really what this means is that if you have something that you need to configure, a property that you want to configure that you don't want to hard code in your code, there are a bunch of ways that you can do it. So here's a long list. We'll take a look at the list of different property sources, but it allows you to basically set a property value in, say, your application.properties when you're working in your local environment or a dev environment. And then that property can be overridden by something later on, like a command line argument or an environment variable or so on. So here in the docs, it says property values can be injected directly into your beans using the @value annotation. And that's what we're going to look at today. I've done some videos on configuration properties, and I'll go ahead and link to those below. But today we're looking at the @value annotation because really it's the easiest way to go ahead and inject a property value right into your code. So we'll take a look at that. The thing to note is that Spring Boot uses a very particular property source order. So each of these are property sources. And that is designed to allow some sensible overriding of value. Again, we'll see this in action as we go throughout this demo today. So properties are considered in the following order, with values from lower items, so down the list, overriding earlier ones at the top of the list. So let's see if we go through this list. One thing that we're used to using is config data, such as our application.properties. We declare a value we declare a key and a value, and we can go ahead and use that in our application somewhere. But if we declare that key and value here, any other of the ones below it, any of the property sources below it here, will override what is in an application.properties. So this is, there are a lot of different property sources. Nobody expects you to remember all of them. I always have to come back to this list because I don't use all of them. I use a few of them. So what we're going to look at today is we'll talk about configuring some properties here in application.properties, and then we'll take a look at maybe a command line argument that can override that property. So with that, let's go ahead and create a new application. We'll open it up in IntelliJ IDEA or whatever your favorite text editor ID is, and we'll work through it. So let's jump in. So the first thing that I'm going to do is head over to start.spring.io. And if you notice, this magical blue star means that I have favorited this website because I come here all the time and you should too. So we're using a Maven project. We're using Java. The latest stable is 2.6.7 at the time of this recording. We're going to create a group of dev.danvega, and we'll say that this is the greeting service value because we're using the @value annotation. So this is a demo project for Spring Boot. This all looks good. We're using jar as our packaging, and I'm going to select Java 17. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and generate this project. Actually, we need to override that. I forgot that we actually do need a dependency. So we are going to use the web dependency. We're going to create a controller and do some things in there and inject these values using @value. So we'll go ahead and select web, and let me go ahead and override that, and we'll open that up in IntelliJ, and we'll get to work. All right, so here we are in the application. The first thing that I'm going to do is actually come in here and create a new package. We're going to call this controller, and I'm going to create a new Java class in here called greeting controller. And in this controller, we're going to say that this is a REST controller. We're going to create a new method here, and this is going to be a get mapping. So just on the root context, the same as saying like this, or not even that, but just that. So we're just going to say get mapping, and then we're going to say public. This is going to return a string. We'll call this home, and we'll return hello world. Okay, so we're returning a greeting there. Now, what we want to do is actually externalize this, right? This is something that we don't want to hard code in our application. I know this is really a contrived example, but you can imagine any value that you would not want to hard code in your application, you want to move to some configuration. So the way that we can do that is we'll start with resources, application.properties, and I'm going to just start with a greeting.salutation, and we'll call this hello. So I'm going to start with a salutation, and let's go ahead and let's get rid of this. And what I want to do is somehow get that value that is in there in application.properties. I want to get the value of greeting.salutation into this controller. So I'm going to set up a property here. I'm going to say this is a private string, and we'll call this greeting salutation. And now the way that I'm going to get that value into this property is by using the @value annotation. So if we jump into the @value annotation, let's go ahead and pull this down and read what this says. So it says this annotation is used at the field or method constructor parameter level that indicates a default expression for the annotated element. Typically, this is used for expression-driven or property-driven dependency injection. So we are going to inject a property. Also support for dynamic resolution of handler method arguments, for example, in Spring MVC. This is important. A common use case is to inject values using this kind of expression. So some prefix by dot and then the property. This style is using the spell, which is Spring expression language. Alternatively, values may be injected using this, which is the style property placeholder. So we're going to use this today. But you can use Spring expression language to kind of do some dynamic things there. So we're saying add value. So remember that that expression looks like this. And inside of there, we want to reference whatever the key is here in our application.properties. So I'm just going to say that. So now that is greeting.salutation. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say greeting salutation plus that. And with that, we should be able to go ahead and run our application, view it in the browser, because if we're at localhost 8080, this is the Git mapping for the root. So let's go ahead and head back to the browser and go to localhost 8080. And there we go. So it says hello world. Now we have another scenario of what happens when we don't put in a value for this. So if we go into application.properties, we'll go ahead and comment that out and restart this. And you see that we get an error. So it says, hey, basically we're trying to inject some type of dependency, and we could not resolve the placeholder greeting.salutation. So what do we do here? We want to make sure that there is a default value. So the way that we do that here inside of this greeting.salutation, we're just going to put a colon and say if there's nothing, I want you to go ahead and display hello. So let's go ahead and start this. At this point, it starts up okay. Head back to the browser and refresh, and it's still hello world. Let's just go ahead and make this interesting so we know that something's changed. And let's restart it. And here we go, and there's hello world. Okay, so far so good. One of the nice things about these values here is we can go ahead and basically contrive keys or values from other keys. So if we wanted to do like a welcome.name is Dan, welcome.greeting is equal to, and now we can go ahead and say, hey, I want you to use that greeting.salutation from before, and I want you to use the welcome.name from the one prior. So now we've constructed this welcome.greeting. And so what I want to do is go ahead and use that. So I can say value, I can say welcome.greeting, and I can say private string welcome greeting. And now I can go ahead and use that in this scenario. And let's go ahead and rerun this. And if we refresh, it says, hello, Dan. So we've seen a couple things here. We can set up the different keys and values here in application.properties. We can inject them into our controller or really any code using the value annotation. We've also seen that we can kind of contrive, build upon each of these keys. Using these keys, we can create different key value pairs here. Okay, so in the application.properties, we have this greeting.salutation. We're going to change this. We want to override this value. And let's, we looked at that list of property sources. So application.properties is near the top, and then anything below that will kind of override this value. So if you were moving to something like the cloud and you wanted to override this value, you can use something like an environment variable. Here in our local environment, I'm going to use a command line argument, which is lower on that list, which will override anything in application.properties. So what I want to do is override greeting.salutation. One way I can do that is I can go up to Run in IntelliJ. I can go to Edit Configurations. Here in my environment, under Program Arguments, I'm going to set a new command line argument, and that was for greeting.salutation. And I want to go ahead and set that to, we'll use that little wave emoji again, and we'll say hello. So now if I go ahead and hit apply and OK and head back to the browser and refresh. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and rerun this application so it picks up that command line argument. And if I refresh, you'll see I get the wave, comma, Dan. So that is, did we not put a hello in there? Oh, we did. There we go. So that is picking up from the command line argument and overriding what is defined here in our application.properties. All right, so you just saw a way to go ahead and inject some of these property values into your code. There's another way to do this, and that is by using the @configuration properties annotation. And so I just want to quickly talk about the differences. So when you have these one-off values that you want to inject, it makes sense to go ahead and use that value. If you just have like one value you want to get in there. One thing you don't get with that @value annotation is there is no metadata about the properties in your application. So when somebody else goes into application.properties and starts typing out the value that they want to set, like greeting.salutation, there's no code assist because the IDE there's no metadata around it. With @configuration properties, you get that metadata. So you get that code assist that helps someone kind of figure out what properties to set in application.properties. Also, if you're going to have a collection of related configuration properties, you should use @configuration properties because it keeps them all in one place. Again, we did this for like a one-off 2, 3 values. Even in that scenario, I would have moved them in. But for this contrived example, it worked okay. So if you have more than one, if you just have one-offs, then you can go ahead and create them in there and then use @value annotation. If you have a collection of them, I would move them over to @configuration properties, and I have a video on how to do that and how to set up default values in there as well. So with that, I think we're done. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please go ahead and leave me a thumbs up. Leave me a comment below if you have any questions on what we talked about today. And as always, friends, happy coding.